Her son lifted his mimosa and asked, "Do you like the $7,000 Clara gives you?" With half the neighborhood watching. Helen Price, retired school secretary and widow, didn't flinch. Clara smiled beside him, polished and calculating, like generosity came with receipts. By sunset, Helen's silence had hardened into resolve, and a 30-year paper trail. She'd raised him through every setback, signed every check, and stayed quiet longer than they deserved. And when they tried to seize what she'd built, they learned what happens when a mother remembers everything. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The chandelier above the dining table glittered like captured sunlight, refracting off the mimosa glasses lined in perfect symmetry. Helen Price sat at the far end of the long oak table, a quiet figure framed by white tablecloths and gold-trimmed plates. Around her, chatter buzzed. Neighbors, business partners, Clara's yoga friends. People who treated Mother's Day brunch like an upscale networking event rather than what it was supposed to be. Family. Chase's voice sliced through the hum. "All right, everyone," he said, rising with the easy confidence of someone used to attention. His suit jacket was unbuttoned just enough to flash the edge of a Rolex. "Let's raise a glass to the woman who keeps this whole thing running." Every head turned toward Clara. She smiled that polished, camera-ready smile and placed her hand on Chase's arm. "Oh, Chase, don't start." But he did. "To Clara," he continued, "who makes sure Mom always has what she needs." Applause followed. Light, polite, performative. Helen pressed her napkin to her lap, lips curving into the faintest smile. It wasn't gratitude. It was survival. An old habit from years of pretending not to notice the tone beneath her son's compliments. Clara dabbed the corner of her mouth and added, "We upped it this year, you know. 7,000, same as last year, but early. We wanted you to have a little cushion." A cushion. Like she was a worn-out couch. Helen nodded once, quietly, as if acknowledging a weather report. The mimosa glass before her trembled just slightly when she lifted it, her reflection warping in the orange fizz. Across the table, Giselle froze mid-bite. The girl's fork hovered above her plate, a piece of strawberry sliding off unnoticed. Her wide brown eyes darted from her father to her grandmother, reading the tension no one else seemed to notice, or dared to. Clara leaned closer to Chase, whispering something that made him smirk. Then, in that lazy drawl he used when he wanted to sound casual but knew he was about to humiliate someone, he asked, "So, Mom?" He paused long enough for the room to hush, every polite smile pivoting toward Helen. "Do you like the 7,000 Clara gives you?" The question hung there, bright and cruel, like glass, about to shatter. Helen blinked once. The edges of her vision sharpened. The clink of a fork. The faint citrus of champagne. The artificial sweetness of a smile from someone across the table pretending not to be entertained. She took a small sip of water instead of answering. The coolness steadied her pulse. "Well?" Clara pressed, still smiling, voice soft but razor-edged. "You've never really said what you'd do with it." Helen set her glass down with quiet precision. "I appreciate every kindness," she said, her tone even, layered with dignity no amount of money could buy. Chase laughed, a short, awkward burst that broke too loud in the quiet. "Come on, Mom, you can tell us. You put it to good use, right? We just want to make sure you're taken care of." "I'm sure you do," Helen said simply. The room's air changed. Someone coughed. Someone else reached for the bread basket just to have something to do. Giselle's chair creaked as she leaned forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Grandma." Helen placed a hand on her granddaughter's arm under the table, a small, invisible warning. "Not now." Clara refilled her own glass, eyes gleaming. "It's important to show gratitude, don't you think? especially for what family gives. Helen turned her gaze to Clara, meeting her stare head-on for the first time that morning. Gratitude should never be confused with permission, she said softly. Chase blinked, unprepared for the sentence's weight. The room went still. Even the chandelier light seemed to dull. From the kitchen doorway, a server cleared his throat. Ms. Price, would you like more water? Helen smiled gently. Please. As he poured, Helen's reflection shimmered in the water jug, an older woman, silver-haired but steady-eyed, sitting amid people who mistook her grace for weakness. When she looked up again, Chase was whispering to Clara, voice tight. Giselle watched, jaw set, her young face quietly mirroring Helen's calm defiance. Helen folded her napkin neatly beside her plate. Excuse me, she said. I need a bit of air. She rose, her chair sliding back with a deliberate scrape that broke the tension like a blade. The guests made space without knowing why, sensing the quiet power in her retreat. Outside on the terrace, the Atlanta air was warm and soft, smelling faintly of honeysuckle. Helen drew a slow breath, eyes lifted to the skyline beyond the gated neighborhood. Behind her, laughter resumed, forced, brittle, hollow. She reached into her purse and touched the small leather notebook she always carried. Its edges were worn, its pages mostly blank. Not for long. Inside, she could still hear Chase's voice echoing, smug and careless. Do you like the $7,000 Clara gives you? Helen smiled to herself, a slow, private smile that no one at that table would ever forget, once they understood what it meant. The elevator creaked as it rose toward the 6th floor of the Briarwood. Residences, the kind of middle-income condo complex no one ever bragged about but everyone knew was safe, quiet, and clean. Helen stepped out, heels clicking against the polished tile, her reflection following her in the dark window glass. The weight of brunch still clung to her like a perfume she couldn't wash off. Citrus, champagne, and humiliation. Inside her apartment, the silence felt alive. She slipped off her shoes by habit, set her purse on the small entry table, and walked straight to the kitchen. The clock above the sink read 3:17 p.m. She hadn't eaten much at the brunch table. Her appetite had vanished somewhere between Chase's smirk and Clara's smile. But she wasn't hungry now either. She wanted stillness. She wanted facts. Her dining table was a scarred wooden one she'd kept since Chase was in middle school. It had pen marks on the edge from his homework days, little reminders of when his hands had been smaller, his tone softer. She sat down, reached into her purse, and drew out the leather notebook she'd touched on the terrace. It opened with a soft sigh, the first page blank except for the faint imprint of the word price, embossed on the inside cover. She picked up a pen, paused, and then began to write. Chase, 1987. Private school tuition, $1,800. Lunch money, $20 a week. Rent help, 1996, $1,200. Seed loan, 2004, $15,000. Her handwriting was steady but small, the kind that came from decades of clerical work. She wrote every number like it mattered, because it did. Not just the money, but the memory that came with it. Every request, every favor, every time she'd said yes when saying no would have been easier. She kept going. 2005, loan for down payment, $10,000. 2006, furniture, gas money, cell phone bills when his startup needed a bridge. Each line was a brick, and with every brick, the quiet fury inside her began to take shape. On the table beside her, the afternoon light began to fade. She didn't notice until her shadow stretched long across the page. She paused, flexing her fingers, and whispered, You always did think the tab disappeared when you walked out the door. The phone rang. The old landline she never bothered to disconnect. Only one person ever called it anymore. Helen reached over, half smiling before she picked up. Thelma, she said. On the other end came a voice that sounded like cinnamon and gravel. I heard what he said. Helen's lips tightened. News travels fast. Girl, it was all over that brunch table before you even left. Chase running his mouth like he discovered money yesterday. A pause. You ready? Helen let the question hang for a moment. The pen in her hand hovered over the open notebook. I've been ready, she said finally, her tone calm as a church bell. I just haven't moved yet. A low chuckle rumbled through the receiver. Then let's move. Helen smiled, small and private. Not yet. Tonight's for remembering. They hung up without goodbyes. Old friends didn't need them. Helen pushed the notebook aside and reached for the file box she kept on the top shelf of the closet. She had labeled everything over the years: taxes, insurance, letters. But one folder had a red tab that read, in her neat handwriting, Quiet Contributions. When she pulled it out, the papers inside gave a faint rustle, as if they too were waking up. Receipts, wire transfer records, handwritten notes Chase had left her when he was broke and desperate and kind. She spread them across the table, a paper map of her sacrifices. There was the canceled check from 1996, her handwriting in blue ink for Chase's rent. The note from 2004, his promise to repay her within 6 months after his first investor meeting. A thank you card that simply said, "You're the best, Mom. Couldn't do this without you." He had done it without her, in the end, but the ink still mattered. She began adding up the numbers in the margins, interest and inflation turning small kindnesses into real currency. She wasn't after vengeance in dollars. She was after dignity in proof. Outside, thunder rolled low across Atlanta's skyline, slow and deliberate, as if echoing her mood. Rain tapped softly at the window, turning the city lights into streaks of gold and gray. Helen leaned back, eyes on the growing list, and whispered, "Let's see what 7,000 buys, compared to 30 years of everything." Her cell phone buzzed, a text from Giselle. "You okay, Grandma?" Helen typed back, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just organizing old things." She stared at the screen for a moment longer, then added one more line to the notebook. 2025. Lesson begins. She capped the pen, pressed her palm flat against the open pages, and closed the cover with care. The sound it made was soft, final, like the seal on a vault. In the quiet that followed, the thunder faded. Helen rose, walked to the window, and watched lightning split the distance over the city. Her reflection stared back at her. Older, yes, but not broken. Rebuilding. Her phone rang again. Same landline, same single ring before the voice message cut in. Thelma's voice. "Tomorrow morning. Carter Nix's office? You'll want to hear what he's got." Helen smiled, slow and certain. She glanced back at the table, the notebook, the open file, the rows of receipts that told her real story. Her own voice, soft but sure, filled the room. "Then tomorrow," she said, "we move." Monday morning broke clean and bright over Atlanta, the kind of sky that made the city's glass towers gleam like they had nothing to hide. Helen parked her sedan, a silver Camry that had seen 20 reliable years, between two hulking SUVs outside an office complex off Peachtree. She smoothed her skirt, checked the button at her collar, and stepped out with the calm of someone who had already made up her mind. Inside, the law firm's reception smelled faintly of lemon polish and confidence. A young assistant behind the marble desk greeted her with a smile too wide to be sincere. "Good morning, ma'am. Do you have an appointment?" "Yes," Helen said, opening her purse to check the neatly folded letter Thelma had arranged. "With Mr. Carter Nix." The woman's fingers danced over the keyboard. "He's expecting you. Elevator to the 12th floor, second door on the left." Helen thanked her and made her way up, the elevator's mirrored walls catching her reflection in flashes. She didn't look like someone here for war. Her pearl earrings, her sensible shoes, her soft gray cardigan. But the notebook in her bag weighed more than paper. When the doors opened, she found Carter's office just as Thelma had described. Sleek, wood-paneled, all understated authority. A tall man in his 50s stood from behind his desk, grinning like he'd just seen a ghost he was happy about. "Well, I'll be," he said, crossing the room in long strides. "Helen Price. It's been what, 20 years?" Helen smiled, polite but faintly surprised. "You remember. Remember? You kept my mama from losing her house when I was still in law school. I never forgot that." He gestured to a chair. "I've said for years, if Helen Price ever needed a door opened, I'd swing it wide." Helen set her purse on the chair beside her and met his gaze evenly. "It's not a door I need, Carter. It's an account." His brow lifted, curiosity tempered with respect. "Then we'll find it." She opened her notebook, laid out several neatly clipped packets of paper. The receipts, bank copies, letters. The desk filled with her past, organized and undeniable. Carter picked up the first stack and scanned a few lines, eyes narrowing in focus. Loan repayments, tuition, startup seed funding. He looked up. "All to your son?" "Everyone." "And no repayment?" Helen gave a single shake of her head. "Not a dime. But that's not the part that stings." He waited. "The part that stings," she continued, voice low, "is that he remembers it as charity." Carter leaned back, folding his hands. The sunlight caught on the edge of his watch. Same brand as Chase's, but worn without arrogance. "You've got documentation, standing, and leverage." Helen tilted her head slightly, assessing him. "Those are words I like." He smiled. "You always did have a quiet kind of power. You thinking lawsuit? Or negotiation?" "Neither," she said. "I'm thinking correction." That earned a small laugh from him, though he quickly sobered as he flipped another page. "You've cataloged every cent, compound interest on this alone. We're talking 6 figures easy. I can make noise with this, Helen. Real noise." Helen looked out the window at the skyline, those tall, sterile towers that her son probably saw from his own penthouse. "I don't want noise. Carter, I want him to understand the cost of forgetting who helped him build his name." Carter nodded slowly. "You want the lesson to leave a mark." "I'm tired," she said, eyes still on the glass. "Tired of being the quiet one." The air between them shifted, an understanding, wordless but solid. Carter reached for his pen and notepad, writing quickly. "Here's what we'll do. You'll give me copies of all of this. I'll draft a series of filings. Not public yet, just groundwork. We'll frame it as a preliminary claim of debt and misrepresentation. You'll have protection and options." Helen's lips curved faintly. "Protection sounds nice. Options sound better." He chuckled. "Still sharp." "I've had practice," she said. When she stood to leave, he walked her to the door. "Helen," he added quietly, "when I say I owe you, I mean it. If this turns messy, you've got me in your corner." "I know," she replied. "That's why I came." She extended her hand. He shook it firmly, not as an old friend, but as an ally. As Helen walked down the corridor, she passed framed photos of Carter with local politicians, judges, foundation donors. Men like Chase wanted to be in those frames. Helen smiled faintly, knowing she'd chosen the right man for the next move. In the elevator, she pulled out her notebook and turned to a new page. She wrote one line in neat script. "Carter Nix, debt repaid, favor returned." Then she closed the cover and slid it back into her purse just as the doors opened to the lobby. Outside, Atlanta hummed beneath a noon sun, restless and golden. Helen took a deep breath and stepped into the light. Her reflection in the glass door looked calm. Sure. Ready. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. One new message from Thelma. "He remembers, doesn't he?" Helen typed back only 2 words. "Oh, perfectly." By Wednesday, the late April rain had settled into a lazy rhythm, soft, steady, and oddly reassuring. Helen liked that kind of rain. It didn't demand attention, it just persisted. Carter's office smelled of coffee and paper when she arrived, the same way school offices used to smell on quiet afternoons. She remembered those years, keeping accounts, making sure everyone else's numbers balanced while her own life tilted silently out of alignment. Not this time. Carter gestured her toward the seat opposite his desk, where her notebook now sat open beside his laptop. A yellow legal pad was already half filled with numbers, calculations, notes written in sharp, confident script. "You've been busy," she said, setting her purse down. He gave a small shrug. "Couldn't sleep. Old habit from trial work. When something's off, I run the math until it makes sense." He tapped his pen against the pad. "Here's what we've got so far. I ran the figures with standard annual compound interest, plus inflation adjustments, tuition, rent support, startup seed, down payments, the whole record. Across 27 years, total value." He paused, looking up. "Over $430,000. Helen didn't blink. She just breathed out through her nose, slow and even. "And they think 7,000 is a favor." A low whistle came from the corner. Thelma had claimed the office's second chair, a paper cup of coffee in one hand and her handbag like a shield in the other. "Lord have mercy," she muttered. "They've been living off you like termites in a foundation." Helen smiled faintly. "They're about to see what legacy math looks like." Carter grinned, clearly enjoying this side of her. "That's the spirit." He turned his screen toward her, showing a draft letterhead with her name bold at the top. "This is just a draft, a demand notice with options. It's polite on the surface, but underneath, it says exactly what needs to be said." Helen leaned in. The first line read, "To the parties of interest regarding financial restitution and trust control." It was elegant, firm, non-negotiable. Carter continued, "Option 1, voluntary settlement, repayment and acknowledgement in writing. Option 2, transfer of disputed assets back to your control. Option 3, legal proceedings and public exposure. I'm betting they'll flinch before we ever need number 3. Thelma chuckled. "I want front row seats for when that woman tries to pronounce restitution." Helen didn't laugh, though the corner of her mouth twitched. "Make sure the letter goes through channels they respect. Clara only responds to hierarchy." "Already planned for that," Carter said. "Her firm's general counsel will get the CC. That'll make her sit up straight." Helen nodded. She was quiet for a moment, watching raindrops slide down the window in perfect streaks. "It's strange," she said softly. "I used to think I was teaching Chase how to build a life. Turns out I was teaching him how to take." Thelma leaned forward, her voice gentler now. "Well, you're teaching him something else today." Carter cleared his throat. "There's one more thing I'd recommend." Helen looked up. "Your will," he said carefully. "You mentioned wanting to adjust beneficiaries. If you're serious about this, now's the time." For the first time, Helen hesitated. It wasn't sentiment, just the weight of history pressing down for one final check. "You think that's necessary?" "I think it's smart," Carter said. "You've already given him enough. Don't leave him the power to rewrite your story when you're gone." Thelma reached out, her palm flat on the table near Helen's hand. "Honey, this ain't revenge, it's record-keeping." Helen gave a small nod. "Then let's record it right." She pulled the pen from her purse and opened her notebook again, this time turning to a clean page. "Carter, dictate it. Everything that needs changing." For the next half hour, the only sounds were pen scratches, keystrokes, and the soft murmur of rain. When they finished, Carter printed the document and slid it across the desk for her signature. Helen read every line carefully. Where Chase and Clara's names once appeared, she drew neat, deliberate lines through them. Beneath Giselle's name, she added, sole heir, with full discretion. She signed her name with a steady hand, Helen Marie Price. Carter notarized the form on the spot. "It's official," he said. "They're out. You're in full control." Helen placed the pen down, her expression unreadable. "They took my generosity for weakness," she murmured. "They'll learn the difference soon enough." Thelma raised her coffee in salute. "Amen to that." Carter stood, gathering the papers into a crisp folder. "I'll file the demand draft tonight and hand-deliver copies tomorrow. Expect movement by the weekend." Helen rose too, smoothing her cardigan. "Good, let's see who moves first." As she reached the doorway, Carter called after her. "Helen, whatever happens next, just remember, they underestimate you because you raised them to feel safe. That's on them, not you." She looked back, the faintest glimmer of humor in her eyes. "Oh, Carter," she said. "They're not safe anymore." Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds hung low, thick with promise. Helen stood under the awning for a moment, folder clutched against her chest, watching the street shimmer with wet reflections. When her phone buzzed, it was a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk." Chase. She didn't reply. Instead, she slipped the phone into her bag, started walking toward her car, and whispered under her breath, "You'll talk when I'm ready to listen." The weekend sun poured through the Price family's glass foyer like it belonged there, glinting off marble floors and designer frames. Giselle walked carefully, phone in one hand, earbuds dangling uselessly around her neck. Her parents were out, her father playing golf, her mother overseeing a renovation downtown. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that made secrets hum behind closed doors. She wasn't snooping, not at first. She'd come into her dad's home office to print a school essay. But when she opened the drawer to look for a flash drive, she saw it. A cream folder with her grandmother's name printed neatly on the front, Helen Price, Trust Access. Her stomach dropped, the kind of fall that starts in your chest and lands behind your ribs. Giselle sat down, heart thudding, and slid the folder open. Inside were 3 crisp sheets, each stamped with Chase's digital signature. Legal jargon swam before her eyes, but one phrase jumped out in bold type: asset consolidation, beneficiary transfer authorization, and beneath it, her father's signature and Clara's, dated 2 days ago. She read one line aloud, whispering to herself, "Consolidation of residential assets under Price Family Holdings, LLC." The next part made her throat tighten. Authorization to access existing trust funds registered under Helen M. Price, pending reassignment upon owner's incapacitation or death. Her father's pen stroke under that line was sharp. Final. "Oh my God," she breathed. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone and snapped 3 photos, front, back, close-up of the signature. She didn't know what all of it meant, not in full, but she knew enough. Her grandmother's name shouldn't be in a document like that. She backed out of the office, checking over her shoulder as though the walls might tattle. When she reached her room, she locked the door, sat cross-legged on her bed, and opened her messages. "Giselle, Grandma. You home? Need to show you something." Seconds later, 3 dots appeared. Helen. Giselle. "Yes, sweetheart, what's wrong?" Giselle's thumbs trembled as she attached the photos. "Found this in Dad's office. It's signed. Look at the title." The dots vanished. Then a full minute passed before Helen replied. "Helen. Stay calm. You didn't tell anyone you found it, did you?" Giselle. "No, they're not home." Helen. "Good. Delete the originals after sending them to this number." A second number appeared, Carter's. Giselle forwarded the images, her heart pounding like she'd crossed some invisible line. 10 minutes later, Helen's phone lit up with Carter's name. She answered on the first ring. "Got the photos," he said without preamble. "Helen, that's not just unethical. It's illegal. They're positioning for early transfer. The wording says, pending incapacitation. That's a setup. He's prepping to move your assets the moment you can't defend them. Helen's voice stayed even. You're sure? Positive. Clara's name's all over the LLC filings. She's planning to fold your condo into their portfolio, probably under the pretext of estate simplification. Once it's in that trust, you'd need a court order to get it back. Helen leaned against her kitchen counter, the cool marble anchoring her. The sunlight through her blinds cast bars of light across her arm. Pretty, almost symbolic. So, she said softly, they came for brunch, and the deed. Carter exhaled, a sound somewhere between disbelief and anger. Looks that way. A low hum filled the space between them, the sound of two people realizing the fight had already started. Helen turned toward the table where her notebook sat open to her most recent entry. Lesson begins. Her pen was still beside it, ink dried mid-thought. Carter, she said. What happens if I close every door but the one I own? He paused. You mean legally or strategically? Both. Then we lock it tight, he said. We freeze titles, restrict financial access, update power of attorney. No one gets in unless you say so. Not even family. Good, Helen murmured. Because family's the problem. Her reflection in the window looked older than she felt, but sharper, steadier. She could almost see the outlines of the next move forming behind her eyes. Carter's voice softened. You okay, Helen? I'm fine. I just didn't expect them to move this soon. They panicked, he said. Your demand notice scared them. Clara probably thinks she can protect herself by consolidating everything before it hits court. Helen smiled faintly. Protect herself from what? The truth? From you, Carter said. For a long moment neither spoke. The line carried only the quiet hum of electricity and distant rain. Then Helen's tone changed. Cooler, deliberate. Let's proceed. Tomorrow morning I want you to file whatever keeps them from touching my condo or my accounts. I'll handle it personally. Thank you, Carter. And tell Thelma to come by around 6. I think she'll want to see what I'm writing next. You got it. After they hung up, Helen sat down at her table. She pulled her notebook close and wrote a new line beneath the last. May 3rd, 2025. They made their move. Then, in smaller print, and so will I. Outside, thunder grumbled again, an echo of the storm from a few nights before. Helen didn't flinch this time. Her phone buzzed once more. A message from Giselle. Are you mad I looked? Helen smiled to herself. Not mad, sweetheart. Proud. You just saved everything that's ours. Min closed her notebook, the soft thud final as a verdict. Helen was folding laundry when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, clipped, impatient. The kind that announced authority instead of asking permission. She set down a towel, smoothed her palms, and walked to the door without hurry. Through the peephole, she saw Clara, tight bun, cream trench coat, sunglasses even though the sky was overcast. Her posture said polite concern. Her eyes, when Helen opened the door, said interrogation. Clara, Helen greeted, voice calm. You're a long way from the country club. Clara's smile didn't reach her cheeks. Just checking on things. You haven't been answering Chase's calls. Helen stepped aside just enough to let the scent of lemon cleaner drift out, but not enough to invite her in. Everything's fine here. No need to check. Clara tilted her head, peering past Helen's shoulder. I heard you've been busy. Legal consultations, estate planning, that sort of thing. Helen's expression didn't change. My affairs are my own. Always have been. Clara's polished tone hardened. You know, it's easy for paperwork to get complicated at your age. We just want to make sure no one's taking advantage of you. Helen gave a small, humorless smile. You mean besides the family? That landed like a dart. Clara's jaw flexed before she recovered. You're upset. I get it. This is about that silly trust document, isn't it? You misunderstood. I don't misunderstand signatures, Helen interrupted. And you're not on the lease, so please leave. Clara blinked, startled by the calm finality in Helen's voice. Excuse me? Helen repeated, firmer. You're not on the lease. Please leave. The silence between them stretched taut. Then, with an icy little laugh, Clara smoothed her trench coat. You've been talking to that lawyer, haven't you? Helen's smile was faint and steady. I've been talking to a lot of people, Clara. You'd be surprised who remembers me fondly. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Clara's face. Well, I suppose we'll talk soon. She turned and walked briskly toward the elevator, heels clicking too loud for the quiet hallway. When the door closed, Helen exhaled slowly, as if releasing the last trace of perfume Clara had left behind. Then she picked up her phone and called Carter. She came by, Helen said simply. I figured she might, Carter replied. They're fishing, trying to see what you know. I'm already drafting the pre-fraud notice. If they try to move anything in your name again, we'll file immediately. Helen walked to her kitchen window, watching the street below. Make it airtight, Carter. I want every loophole sealed. You'll have it. By morning. He paused. You okay? I'm better than okay, Helen said. They just showed their hand. An hour later, the phone rang again. This time, it was Chase. Mom, he started, voice sharp, angry. What the hell are you doing? Helen leaned against her counter, folding another towel with deliberate slowness. Laundry. Don't play games with me. Clara said you threw her out. I asked her to leave. There's a difference. We were just trying to protect your future, Chase said, his tone rising. The same defensive whine he'd used as a teenager whenever he got caught. Helen's voice cut through the line, quiet but lethal. I protected your past, Chase. My turn now. The silence that followed was long and uneven. She could almost hear him clenching his jaw. When he spoke again, his words were smaller. You're really doing this? Yes. You'll regret it. Helen smiled faintly. That's the difference between us, son. I've already done my regretting. She hung up before he could answer. That evening, Thelma stopped by with peach cobbler and a bottle of iced tea. Heard the dragon tried to storm the castle, she said, setting the dessert on the table. Helen chuckled softly. She left without burning a thing. Good, Thelma said, settling into a chair. Carter called me. Said he's filing tonight. Helen nodded. Let him. I'm done being polite. They ate cobbler in companionable silence, the hum of the refrigerator filling the room. Outside, dusk bled slowly across the Atlanta skyline. Helen's phone buzzed again. A text from Giselle. Giselle. They're getting sloppy. Dad's panicking. Giselle. Mom's yelling about damage control. Giselle. Do you want me to record anything? Helen typed back. No, baby. Just keep your eyes open and your head clear. She set the phone down beside her plate and leaned back, eyes calm but sharp with thought. They're unraveling, she murmured. Faster than I expected. Thelma sipped her tea. And what's your next move, General? Helen looked toward the window where the first streetlights flickered on, glinting off the surface of her parked car. The black SUV was gone now. For the first time in days, the space outside her home looked truly empty. She smiled, slow, knowing. I don't need to move, she said. Not yet. I just need to let them trip over their own greed. The smell of slow-cooked pot roast filled the condo long before the sun went down, rich and comforting, the kind of scent that reached through walls and memories. Helen stood at the stove in her apron, tasting a spoonful of collard greens and deciding it needed just a little more vinegar. The pot on the back burner bubbled steady, a deep, homely rhythm that made the place feel alive again. The table was set for three: white plates, cloth napkins, the good cutlery she hadn't used since Chase's wedding. A square of cornbread steamed on each plate, golden and soft. She'd done it all herself, not because she had to, but because it felt like reclaiming something. Her way, her home, her table. The knock was light, polite. Thelma never knocked like she was owed entry. "Come in," Helen called. Thelma breezed in with her usual flair, a cardigan slung over one arm, a small box of store-bought peach ice cream in the other. "If I'm eating your cornbread, we're having something cold with it." Helen smiled. "Put it in the freezer before it melts." Thelma did, then leaned against the counter, watching her friend ladle gravy. "This the peace dinner or the war council?" "Both," Helen said. "Depends on who shows up first." A soft tap followed, gentler than the first. Helen's face softened. That'll be her. When Giselle stepped inside, she looked more like her grandmother than ever. No makeup, curls tied back, eyes alert, but tired. "Hi, Grandma." "Hi, Miss Thelma." "Evening, baby," Thelma said warmly. "You smell that pot roast? You're about to forget your troubles." They sat down together, the table glowing under the soft light. For a moment, everything looked ordinary. Bowls passing, silver clinking, laughter slipping between bites. Helen watched Giselle eat with the quiet contentment of someone memorizing peace while it lasted. Halfway through the meal, Giselle set down her fork. "Mom says you're cutting us out." Thelma paused mid-sip of iced tea. The words hung in the air like static. Helen didn't look offended, just thoughtful. "I'm cutting lies out," she said simply. "Sometimes people live inside them so long they forget who built the walls." Giselle stared at her plate. "She's been saying a lot of things lately." "I know." Helen's tone was gentle but firm. "She's scared. People like your parents think control is the same thing as love. It's not." Giselle nodded slowly, tracing the rim of her glass. "Dad said you were being manipulated, that you didn't understand the paperwork." Helen gave a soft laugh. "If I didn't understand paperwork, he wouldn't have graduated high school." Thelma chuckled low. "Lord, that's the truth." Something in Giselle's face relaxed. "I don't believe them," she said. "I saw what they signed." Helen reached across the table, took her granddaughter's hand. "You have your own eyes. That's the beginning of freedom." They sat in silence for a beat, the air warm, the pot roast nearly gone. Helen excused herself, returning a moment later with a small wrapped parcel, a leather-bound journal tied with a thin blue ribbon. She placed it in front of Giselle. "For you." Giselle untied the ribbon carefully, opening the first page. Blank, clean, waiting. "It's beautiful." "It's more than that," Helen said. "Write down every truth you live through. One day, it's evidence." Giselle frowned slightly. "Evidence? Of what you survived?" Helen said softly. "And of who you are." Thelma murmured, "That's one lesson I wish somebody had taught me earlier." Helen smiled, faint and wistful. "It's never too late to start." The sound of her phone buzzing broke the quiet. Helen wiped her hands on her apron and checked the screen. Carter Nix. She answered on speaker. "Evening, Helen. I've got an update." Helen met Thelma's eyes. "Go ahead." "Just filed the amendments. Your medical proxy has been revised. Clara's name is officially removed. You're under your own authority now." Helen exhaled slowly, a breath that felt heavier than she realized. "Good work, Carter. Thank you." "Anytime," he said. "And Helen, you might want to keep that security camera you ordered last week. Never hurts to have eyes outside." I'll consider it, she said with a small smile. Good night, Carter. She ended the call and set the phone face down. The room fell quiet again, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of cicadas outside the open window. Giselle looked uneasy. Grandma, you really think they'd— Helen interrupted gently. I don't think. I prepare. Thelma nodded approvingly. That's why we follow her lead. They lingered over dessert, letting the ice cream melt just enough to run down the sides of the bowls. By the time Giselle stood to leave, her eyes looked steadier, older somehow. She hugged her grandmother tight, like she understood more than words could say. When the door finally closed, Helen stood in the quiet, clearing plates one by one. She poured the last of the tea, took a slow sip, and stared out at the night sky. The city lights reflected in her window looked almost like sparks. Small, bright, ready. Monday morning brought the kind of light that looked too clean to be trusted. Sharp, sterile, unearned. Helen's condo was quiet except for the rhythmic tick of the kitchen clock and the faint hum of her coffee maker. She had just sat down with her mug when the mail slot clinked. A thick white envelope slid onto the floor, embossed letterhead. Price, Dean and Latimer LLP, her son's attorney. Helen stared at it for a long moment before bending down. She didn't open it right away. She had seen enough in her life to know that some things deserved ceremony. She set the letter on her table beside her notebook, smoothed the corner, and then slid it open with the old brass letter opener her late husband had used for bills. The paper smelled faintly of ink and arrogance. Dear Mrs. Price, we are contacting you regarding your recent estate changes and communications via counsel. This correspondence serves as notice of intent to protect family assets from undue external influence. Helen skimmed, her expression unmoving. Every sentence was coated in legal varnish. Concerns regarding capacity, potential coercion, reassessment of power of attorney. At the bottom, 2 signatures gleamed, Clara J. Price and Chase M. Price. She read it twice, set it down, and reached for her phone. Morning, Carter, she said when he picked up. I figured you'd call. His voice was light but laced with irritation. Their letter landed here too. Standard intimidation. Slander wrapped in Latin. Helen smiled faintly. All bark? No standing, Carter confirmed. They're claiming you're acting under external manipulation, which is their polite way of calling you senile. I've seen toddlers make stronger arguments. Helen's eyes cooled. Then let's teach them about external consequences. He chuckled. Already ahead of you. I've drafted your response. Certified mail, notarized. Title, denial of access. All it says is that they have no authority to act, no access to your property, and no right to your name. I'd like to sign it today. I'll send the courier in an hour. Helen hung up, the faintest smile curving her lips. The kettle whistled in the background. She poured herself another cup and waited. By late morning, the courier arrived, a polite young man in a navy suit who seemed both nervous and curious. Helen signed the pages neatly, each pen stroke deliberate like carving her name in steel. When she handed the envelope back, she said quietly, "Make sure this one lands with a thud." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and she knew it would. Across town, Clara paced their living room, heels clicking against marble. She was on her 3rd phone call, voice tight with irritation. "I just don't understand how she's pulling this off," she hissed. "She has no legal experience, no advisors. She's 70 years old." On the other end, their lawyer's tone was careful. "Mrs. Price, the filings she's submitting are airtight. Whoever's advising her knows exactly what they're doing." Clara froze, realization dawning. "Carter Nix." "Yes, ma'am." "Then we'll discredit him," she snapped. "He owes us favors." "Actually," the lawyer said delicately, "I believe he owes her." Clara's hand tightened around her phone until the case creaked. Unbelievable. She tried Thelma next. The call rang twice, then went dead. She tried again. This time, the automated voice cut her off. The number you have dialed is not accepting calls from this line. Her jaw clenched. She blocked me. That afternoon, Chase took matters into his own hands. He pulled into the Briarwood parking lot in his polished Mercedes, impatience radiating off him like heat. Security at the gatehouse stepped out before he even reached the intercom. "Can I help you, sir?" the guard asked. "I'm visiting my mother, Helen Price, Unit 6B. The guard checked a clipboard. "You're not on her approved list." "I'm her son," Chase snapped. "That should be enough." The guard didn't flinch. "Not according to her instructions, sir." Chase leaned forward, voice hardening. "Do you know who I am?" The guard met his glare evenly. "Yes, sir. That's why I'm doing my job." From the security office window above, Helen watched the entire exchange unfold on the live feed from her newly installed camera. Chase's face was red, jaw tight, one hand gripping the steering wheel hard enough to whiten his knuckles. She didn't smile. Not yet. She just watched him sit there, furious and helpless, before finally peeling away from the gate. Thelma, seated beside her with her teacup, muttered, "Well, I'll be. He looks just like his daddy did when someone told him no." Helen finally allowed herself a small, satisfied exhale. "I guess he learned that expression from me." That evening, she sat back at her dining table, the certified denial of access receipt stamped and filed neatly into her folder. She took out her phone and scrolled through her emergency contacts. She deleted Chase Price, deleted Clara Price. Then, with a calm sense of finality, she tapped Add New Contact and typed 1. Giselle Price. Emergency. Her finger hovered over the save icon for a moment. Then she pressed it. The list rearranged itself, the world clicking into its new order. She poured a small glass of sweet tea and sat near the window, the night calm outside. Across the street, headlights flared, then went dark again. The black SUV was back, idling low, its outline familiar. Helen lifted her phone and dialed Carter. "They're still watching," she said quietly. "Let them," he replied. "It's better when they think they're in control." Helen's gaze didn't waver from the window. They stopped being in control the minute they mailed that letter. By Friday evening, the Atlanta skyline shimmered like glass set aflame. Downtown traffic throbbed with impatience and perfume, the air ripe with the scent of possibility or performance. Helen stepped out of the town car Carter had arranged for her, wearing a navy silk suit and a pair of low heels that clicked with quiet certainty against the marble steps of the Civic Heritage Hall. Inside, the ballroom buzzed with low conversation and polite applause. City council members, nonprofit directors, a smattering of reporters, all gathered for the Legacy Women of Atlanta Awards. Helen Price's name was printed third on the program, between a retired judge and a state university dean. She smoothed the edge of the card between her fingers. "Legacy," she murmured, almost amused. "Funny word for what people try to take from you." Thelma leaned in, whispering, "You earned this one, sugar. Not even they can rewrite it." Helen smiled, calm and radiant. "That's why I'm here." When the MC introduced her, the applause started polite, then grew. Her story had already floated around the community newsletter. Retired school secretary turned community advocate, helping seniors protect their housing rights. She took the stage with her posture straight. No hurry, no nerves. The lights were bright. Cameras blinked. She adjusted the microphone. "I didn't expect this," she began, her voice steady and warm. "Most of my life, I've been the one setting up chairs for other people's speeches." A gentle laugh rippled through the room. Helen continued, "I've spent years keeping quiet while other people told my story for me. Sometimes they made it sound smaller. Sometimes they made it sound like charity. She paused, eyes sweeping across the crowd. But motherhood, she said clearly, is not a bank account. The room fell still. Even the servers froze mid-step. It's not measured in how much you give or how much you're owed. It's not a ledger that anyone else gets to audit. It's a legacy of patience, grace, and sometimes of taking back what's yours when the world forgets who earned it first. There it was, the line that would later ricochet across social media, clipped into 15 seconds of fire. Motherhood is not a bank account. The applause that followed was thunderous. Flashbulbs popped like small fireworks. Helen smiled, not for the cameras, but for herself. When she stepped down from the stage, Thelma was waiting with damp eyes and a tissue she pretended not to need. "Lord, Helen," she whispered, "you just baptized the whole city." By the next morning, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. News sites picked it up first. ATL Senior Wins Legacy Award delivers fiery speech about dignity and family. Then came the video clips. Shared, reshared, captioned with words like Queen Energy and the definition of grace under fire. Even Good Morning Georgia played it, the host smiling into the camera. 70-year-old Helen Price reminded us all that a mother's worth can't be tallied in dollars. Helen's voicemail filled with strangers, women mostly, saying thank you. She listened to a few, then stopped. She didn't need their applause. What mattered was that Chase and Clara would see it, and they'd know exactly who she was now. Clara did see it. She was halfway through a conference call when a coworker sent the link. "Wait," she said sharply. "Turn that off." Too late. The room had already erupted with awes and whispered admiration. Someone muttered, "That's your mother-in-law, right? She's amazing." Clara's smile tightened. "She's resourceful." Within an hour, she was on the phone with their PR consultant. "We need to get ahead of this," she hissed. "She's spinning this like a redemption story." "My own mother just texted me congratulations." "Honestly," the consultant replied, "I'd advise leaning into it. Publicly supporting her. Makes you look magnanimous." Clara gritted her teeth. "Magnanimous," she repeated flatly. "Right." Chase saw it too, sitting in his office, blinds drawn, the video playing muted on his monitor. Helen's calm smile, her measured words. Motherhood is not a bank account. He watched it twice, then 3 times. Finally, he picked up his phone and typed a message. "Chase. Mom. Saw your speech. Proud of you. Let's talk?" Helen read it hours later while standing at her kitchen sink. She didn't reply. Instead, she opened her notebook and wrote, "May 10th. He heard me. Still not listening." Then she set the notebook aside and called Carter. "They'll reach out soon," she said, publicly. "They already have," Carter replied. "Your son tried to issue a statement about reconciliation. I advised the station you had no comment." Helen smiled faintly. "Good." At school, Giselle scrolled through her phone at lunch, watching her grandmother's video on loop. Her friends crowded around her. "Your grandma's famous," one of them said. "She's like a legend." Giselle laughed, proud and shy all at once. "Yeah," she said softly. "She is." That night, Helen sat on her balcony, the city spread beneath her like a glowing map of every life she'd touched. The wind carried the sound of laughter from a nearby park. Families, mothers, daughters. She felt it settle into her chest, warm and steady. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. Unknown number. "Enjoy your 15 minutes, Helen. You don't know what you've started." She stared at the words for a moment, then pressed delete. Her reflection in the glass smiled back, calm, unshaken. By midweek, Atlanta had already moved on to its next headline. The Legacy Award speech had burned bright for 3 days, shared, praised, and replaced. But Helen didn't mind. She didn't give speeches to be remembered. She gave them to clear space for what came next. Carter's office was colder than usual that morning. The hum of the HVAC mixed with the sound of a printer spitting out forms, one after another. Helen sat opposite him, her reading glasses low on her nose as he flipped through a thick folder. "Here's what I've done so far," Carter said, his tone brisk, methodical. "Every financial account you own, frozen against outside access. Any power of attorney not signed within the last 6 months, revoked. I've filed identity protections at both state and federal levels. If anyone tries to impersonate you, even to change a billing address, it'll flag my office immediately." Helen nodded slowly. "And the condo?" "Recorded. Under your trust. Single holder, you only. If they try to move on it, they'll trip an automatic fraud alert." She smiled faintly. "Perfect." Carter leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "You've built a fortress, Helen. They can knock all they want, but no one's getting in." Helen looked out the window at the drizzle streaking down the glass. "That's good," she said softly. "I've spent enough years living with open doors." That evening, Thelma arrived carrying a small fireproof envelope. She dropped it onto Helen's table with a little flourish. "What's this?" Helen asked. "My will," Thelma said. "Updated. You inspired me." Helen's eyebrows lifted. "Oh?" Thelma pulled up a chair. "I changed my beneficiary. That niece of mine don't call me unless she needs a new car. So now, my donation fund for single mothers will go straight to the shelter. I'm following your lead, girl." Helen touched her friend's hand. "That's not a small thing." "Neither was what you did," Thelma said. "You made a whole city sit up and remember that a woman's life doesn't end when her family decides it should." Helen chuckled. "Then I guess we're just getting started." Later that night, Helen's phone buzzed. A text from Giselle. "Giselle. They fight every night now. Giselle. Dad keeps saying you're turning the family against him. Giselle. Mom says the media made you dangerous." Helen typed slowly, her fingers deliberate. Helen. "Truth makes people noisy before it makes them quiet." Helen. "You just stay steady, sweetheart. Don't take sides. Watch. Listen. Learn." Giselle replied with a heart emoji, and Helen could almost feel the girl's pulse through the screen. Young, tense, caught between generations, but loyal in her bones. The next morning, Helen parked outside the Fulton Women's Support and Shelter, an old brick building with chipped paint and flower beds half tended by volunteers. The air smelled faintly of rain and soap. She carried a canvas tote full of notebooks and pencils, her donation to the tutoring program they'd begged her to help run. Inside, the room was full of quiet motion, women folding laundry, a few children coloring at the corner table. A shelter coordinator, a kind woman named Patrice, led Helen to a classroom of mismatched chairs. "This group's special," Patrice said. "They need more than tutoring. They need grounding." Helen smiled. "That, I can do." The women trickled in slowly, some shy, some wary, all tired. Helen introduced herself, then wrote one word on the whiteboard: future. "Every woman in this room has one," she said. "And the first step is remembering you own it." One woman in the back, a tall, sharp-eyed newcomer with a Georgia Bulldogs hoodie, leaned back in her chair. "You look like someone who don't play," she said, half teasing. Helen paused, then smiled, soft but sure. "I didn't," she replied. "Now I do." Laughter rippled through the room, and just like that, the ice broke. That night, back in her condo, Helen stacked her new teaching materials beside her notebook. The fortress Carter built hummed quietly beneath her. Secure accounts, sealed records, untouchable. But Helen knew that peace wasn't just paperwork. It was knowing she could sleep through the night without looking over her shoulder. She poured herself a glass of iced tea and stepped out onto the balcony. The city below pulsed with noise and neon, a heartbeat she finally matched again. Her phone buzzed once more, an email from Carter. The subject line read, "They tried again." Helen opened it. A single sentence stared back. "Unauthorized request to access your financial records. Blocked automatically. Attempt traced." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't panic. Instead, she replied with 3 words. "Let them try." The flowers arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a boy who looked barely old enough to drive. He stood in the hallway clutching an oversized bouquet, white lilies and roses tied with a silk ribbon the color of regret. "For Mrs. Helen Price?" he asked, glancing at the unit number. Helen took one look at the arrangement and knew who had sent them. "Yes," she said softly, signing the clipboard. "Leave them right there." When the boy left, she carried the vase to the counter, found the small white envelope tucked between the stems and opened it. "Mom, let's make peace. We miss you. Chase." Her eyes lingered on the handwriting. Still neat, still careful. The same script that once spelled "thank you" on every birthday card she'd saved for years. She traced the ink with her thumb, then slid the note back into its envelope, folded it twice, and tucked it into her file labeled "Evidence." Emotional manipulation. Then she turned to the bouquet. The lilies were perfect, but they smelled like funerals. She poured the vase water down the sink, petals trembling as she tossed them, one by one, into the trash. 2 days later, her inbox chimed with a new message. The sender's name flashed across the screen like a stain that refused to fade. Clara Price. Helen considered deleting it unread, but something told her to keep it, for the record. She opened it and read, "Helen, I've been trying to understand what's happened between us. I know we've had our differences, but I never meant for things to get this ugly. Chase is under a lot of pressure, and I just want our family to heal. Maybe you've been influenced by people who don't really understand how close we are. I hope one day you'll see that everything we've done has been out of love. We're family, Helen. Please don't let this become something it doesn't have to be." Clara Helen reread the line. Everything we've done has been out of love, and let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. It wasn't a cruel sound, more like exhaustion finally finding its voice. She hit forward, typed Carter Nix into the recipient line, and added one note before sending, "For your records." She's starting to panic. 10 minutes later, Carter's reply arrived. "Archived. Thanks for the paper trail." Helen smiled faintly. The paper trail was growing long and strong, the kind no lawyer could ignore, and no family could rewrite. That evening, the soft sound of knocking interrupted her quiet. When she opened the door, Giselle stood there holding a worn manila envelope. "Grandma, can I come in?" Helen stepped aside. "You never have to ask." Giselle dropped her backpack on the floor and handed over the envelope. "I wanted you to read something. It's my college essay." Helen's expression softened. "College already?" Giselle smiled shyly. "It's early application season. Mom says it's too soon, but I wanted you to see it first." They sat at the kitchen table where the old light above hummed softly. Helen adjusted her glasses and began to read. "The Strongest Woman I Know" by Giselle Price. Strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like patience that won't bend. My grandmother taught me that. She never raised her voice, but the world listened anyway. She taught me that being kind doesn't mean being small, and that silence can be power when it's chosen, not forced. When people tried to take what was hers, she didn't fight with noise. She fought with proof. And she won. I want to be that kind of woman. The words blurred halfway through, not from poor printing but from Helen's eyes filling with tears. She blinked hard, then laughed softly at herself. "Oh, baby," she whispered. "This is beautiful." Giselle smiled, nervous but proud. "I didn't know if you'd like it." Helen reached across the table, taking her hand. "I love it. More than you'll ever know." They sat there for a moment in easy silence, two generations of women linked by something stronger than blood, a shared defiance, quiet and certain. After Giselle left, Helen wiped her eyes and returned to her desk. The vase that once held the lilies now stood empty, filled instead with neatly stacked envelopes. The demand letter, the denial of access, Clara's guilt-laced email. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Unknown number. "We're done talking, Helen. Next time, we won't ask." She stared at the screen, unmoving, then opened her drawer, pulling out the small voice recorder Carter had given her, just in case. She switched it on, the soft click echoing in the quiet. "Now we'll see," she said calmly. "Who's done talking?" Monday morning dawned pale and deliberate, the kind of light that made everything look sharper than it really was. Helen sat at Carter's long oak conference table, her notebook open in front of her, pages fanned like cards in a well-played hand. Across from her, Carter adjusted his glasses and slid a draft document toward her. "I put it in plain English," he said. "No loopholes, no niceties. It's a counteroffer. Simple, final, and legal." Helen read silently, her eyes scanning each paragraph with surgical precision. All financial ties between Helen M. Price and the parties of Chase M. Price and Clara J. Price are hereby dissolved. No inheritance claims, no trust access, no shared accounts, no fiduciary obligation of any kind. She paused, then looked up. "That covers everything?" "Everything," Carter said. "Once they sign this, they can't touch your name, your assets, or your reputation again. There'll be ghosts in your records." Helen leaned back, folding her hands over her lap. "Good. But I want to add one more thing." Carter raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." She took his pen and wrote neatly beneath the final clause. "And no further contact unless initiated by me." She dotted the period slowly, like it meant something heavier than ink. Carter read the line, then gave a small, approving nod. "You always know how to write an ending." Helen smiled faintly. "That's not the ending. That's the piece." He chuckled. "Either way, it's poetic." They both signed and notarized the document, Carter sealing each copy in an envelope. "These will go out today. Certified, recorded, and archived. Once they get them, there's nothing left to argue." Helen gathered her things, but before she left, Carter hesitated. "Helen," he said, quieter now. "If they push back, don't engage. Let me handle the noise." She looked him in the eye. "Carter, I've been handling their noise for 40 years. I know how to turn down the volume." That afternoon, the calls started. The first was Clara. Her number flashed across Helen's screen like a stain. Helen let it ring, then again, then again. Finally, the phone went silent, and stayed that way. She opened her settings, scrolled to blocked contacts, and added Clara Price. One motion, one clean break. A minute later, a new message popped up. Not from Clara this time, but from an unknown number. "You can't just erase family, Helen." Helen smiled. She didn't type back. Some silences were earned. At that same moment, across town, Clara paced the kitchen of their immaculate house, phone clutched in one hand. "She's blocking me now," she hissed. Chase stood at the counter, scrolling through his own messages. "She's serious." Carter sent the formal document. No inheritance, no trust, no access, nothing. Clara whirled on him. "Fix it." "How?" he shot back. "She's airtight now. Even our lawyer said so." She pressed her palms to the marble countertop, breathing hard. "She's making us look like leeches." Chase's jaw tightened. She's making us irrelevant. That evening, as twilight stretched across the city, Giselle sat on her bed surrounded by college forms. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father. Chase, your grandma's gone full witch. Giselle stared at it for a long moment, the blue bubble glowing like a warning. She thought about the essay she'd written, the look in Helen's eyes when she'd read it, the kind of strength that didn't ask for applause. She typed back one line, Giselle, and thank God she did. Then she turned off her phone, tucked her journal under her pillow, and smiled into the dark. Across town, Helen sat by her window, the night pressing soft against the glass. The city hummed beneath her, cars, voices, the rhythm of a life that finally belonged to her again. On the table beside her sat the signed counter offer, ready for courier pickup. She ran her fingers over the envelope's edge, feeling the texture of it, the weight of completion. Her phone buzzed once more. Unknown number. You really think paper can protect you? She exhaled slowly, almost amused. It already has, she whispered. Then, with deliberate calm, she powered off the phone, slid the envelope into her outgoing mail tray, and turned out the lights. The city outside shimmered in her window, reflected in a woman's calm, knowing eyes. Saturday morning came quiet and clear, the first stillness Atlanta had offered in weeks. Helen sat at her dining table with a cup of black coffee cooling beside her, the worn leather notebook open to its final pages. The table around her was a map of paper and history, every receipt, letter, and record she had ever saved, stacked in careful, chronological order. The numbers stared back at her like ghosts she was finally ready to count. She wrote slowly, pressing hard enough for the ink to leave an impression through the paper. Private school tuition, $1,800 rent assistance, $1,200 down payment loan, $10,000 startup funding, $15,000 utilities, groceries, insurance, countless small rescues. On and on it went. She totaled each column by hand, her mind as precise as it had been the first day she'd started as a school secretary decades ago. When she reached the end, she added one final line, boxed in bold in the center of the page. Total lifetime contributions, $437,812. Total respect returned, $0. Helen leaned back and exhaled, the sound half relief, half finality. The notebook's pages fluttered slightly in the air from the small draft that slipped under the door. Atlanta spring, warm and unbothered. For a long moment, she just stared at the numbers. They weren't about money. They were about time. About every hour she'd spent helping, saving, believing. About the slow erosion of gratitude. About the invisible cost of love when it's mistaken for obligation. Then, with a soft, deliberate motion, she closed the book. The sound was small but solid, like the click of a lock. She stood, walked to her bedroom, and pulled open the small floor safe tucked behind an old cedar chest. Inside were the documents Carter had prepared, the trust reassignments, the legal filings, her updated will. Everything tight, sealed, and protected. Helen placed the notebook on top, her hand resting on the worn leather cover for a long heartbeat. "That's all you're getting," she whispered, to the ghosts, to the memories, to the echo of her own silence. Then she shut the safe door and turned the dial until the click settled like punctuation on a life reclaimed. By late afternoon, Carter arrived carrying a manila folder. "Thought I'd deliver this one in person," he said, stepping inside. Helen poured him coffee before he even asked. "You've been busy." "You're my favorite client," he replied with a half smile, "and my most dangerous one." He handed her the folder. "It's done. The donation went through this morning. Your trust has officially funded the Helen Price Women's Legal Defense Grant. Every penny comes from your assets, not a cent they can challenge." Helen blinked, a slow smile spreading across her face. You named it after me? You earned it, Carter said. This will help women who can't afford representation, women who've been silenced or cornered. I figured you'd like that. Her voice caught slightly. I love it. Carter nodded, leaning back in his chair. One more thing. The education fund for Giselle? Approved. It's airtight. Clara and Chase can't access or redirect it, even if they tried. When Giselle turns 18, it's hers. Outright. Helen's eyes softened. You've given me something they never did, Carter. Peace of mind. He smiled gently. No, Helen. You built that yourself. I just filed the paperwork. That evening, Giselle arrived with her backpack, hair loose, smile shy. She hugged her grandmother hard, then looked around the condo, her eyes landing on the framed photo of Helen's award night on the wall. I saw the article about your donation, Giselle said. People at school were talking about it. They said you're funding lawyers for women who can't afford them. Is that true? Helen nodded. It's true. That's amazing, Giselle said, grinning. I told them my grandma doesn't just make speeches. She makes moves. Helen chuckled. Well, I figured it was time to stop talking about fairness and start financing it. Giselle dropped her backpack by the couch, then took Helen's hand. You're the richest woman I know. Helen squeezed her hand gently. Then I'm richer than I ever planned to be. They sat together for a while, the evening sun sliding golden across the hardwood. Helen felt a stillness she hadn't known in years. The war was over. The walls were strong. And beside her sat the only person she'd ever truly been fighting for. Later that night, after Giselle had gone home, Helen stood by the window again. The city glittered below, a living reminder that the world could spin peacefully, even after storms. She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out her phone. A new message blinked on the screen. Unknown number again. You think you've won, old woman? Helen didn't reply. Instead, she scrolled to contacts, found Carter Nix, and typed, "We'll need to tighten one more lock." Then she turned off her phone, shut the curtains, and glanced at the painting above her mantel, an old watercolor of a magnolia tree in bloom. She had chosen it years ago because it reminded her of endurance. The moving truck came just after dawn, rumbling softly through the quiet, gated streets of Briarwood. Helen stood by the doorway with her arms folded, watching two young men carry her old oak dresser down the hall. Be careful with that one, she said. It's heavier than it looks. The taller mover smiled. Yes, ma'am. Taking it straight to the shelter, right? That's right. Helen handed him a folded note taped to a check. For the director. Tell her it's not charity. It's rotation. He nodded, respectful, and she watched the last of her furniture disappear into the truck. Chairs, a side table, the dining set where she'd once signed away her son's power over her life. The condo looked strange without them, empty, but not lonely. When the door closed behind them, she exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The space felt cleaner now, lighter. The walls hummed softly with quiet, the good kind. She ran her hand along the bare wall where her bookshelf used to stand and smiled. Less to dust, she murmured. By evening, the smell of rosemary and roasted chicken drifted through the kitchen. Helen's hands moved steadily, slicing sweet potatoes, setting 3 plates on her smaller table, just enough room for what remained of her family. Thelma arrived first, carrying a bottle of iced tea and a bouquet of grocery store flowers. You're getting fancy, she teased, eyeing the simmering pot. Helen grinned. Just making something warm. Feels right tonight. Smells like peace, Thelma said, settling into her chair. A few minutes later, Giselle came bounding through the door, cheeks flushed from the cool evening air. Grandma, it smells amazing! Helen took her coat and hung it by the door. Sit, sweetheart, everything's ready. They ate together. No speeches, no talk of lawsuits or press or the past. Just chicken, cornbread, laughter, and the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Thelma told a story about her days teaching at the old high school, and Giselle groaned when Helen chimed in with, "That's not how I remember it." For once, there was no edge, no tension, no waiting for the other shoe to drop. The world outside could spin itself silly. This table belonged to no one but them. After dinner, Thelma insisted on doing dishes. Giselle wandered into the living room and noticed a new picture frame on the end table. It showed Helen standing beside the director of the Fulton Women's Shelter, both smiling beneath a banner that read, "Thank you, community partner." In the corner of the shelter photo wall, Helen's own picture hung modestly, smaller than the others, but somehow it caught the light. Giselle touched the frame lightly. "You didn't tell me they put your photo up." Helen shrugged, smiling. "I didn't need to. Some things don't need noise." Thelma returned from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. "You sure about giving away all that furniture?" Helen glanced around her home. The rooms looked soft now, uncluttered. "It's not the furniture I'll miss. It's the space it took up." Thelma nodded slowly. "You really are a new woman, Helen Price." Helen smiled at that. "No, just the same woman with a quieter house." Later that night, after they'd both gone, Helen walked through the empty living room. The echo of footsteps bounced gently off the walls. Outside, the moon hung low over Atlanta, pale and wide. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A single text from Carter. Carter. Title, Helen Price. Owner. She smiled, soft, complete. She typed back only 2 words. Helen. Finally, yes. She set the phone face down, poured herself a glass of tea, and stood by the window, looking out at the city that had witnessed her rebuild everything brick by brick. No posts, no interviews, no announcements. Just home. In the distance, headlights curved down the road and faded, disappearing into the sprawl of the city. The world was moving on, as it should. Helen pressed her palm to the glass and whispered, "So will I." Then she turned off the lights. The room glowed for a second in the moonlight, then fell still. Sunday came wrapped in quiet sunlight, the kind that slipped through blinds in clean stripes, soft enough not to wake the house too early. Helen moved slowly through her kitchen, humming under her breath, a tune she couldn't name but had known all her life. The air smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish. She laid out the small table the same way she always did now, 2 plates, one smaller for Giselle, one larger for herself, and a third just for comfort. An open space where Thelma's laughter still seemed to linger even when she wasn't there. When the doorbell rang, Helen didn't call out. She simply smiled, already knowing the rhythm of the knock. Giselle stepped inside carrying a bundle of daisies wrapped in brown paper. "Hi, Grandma." Helen took the flowers with a small laugh. "You know, you don't have to bring me anything." Giselle shrugged. "You taught me that giving doesn't mean owing." That earned her a soft grin. "Smart girl." They arranged the daisies together in a clear vase, the stems clicking gently against the glass. Giselle filled it halfway with water, then set it in the middle of the table where the sunlight hit just right. The house smelled of butter and vanilla by the time the timer dinged. Helen pulled out a tray of cookies, golden and soft, steam curling from their tops. She placed them on a cooling rack, and Giselle stole one immediately, blowing on it before biting. "Mmm," she said through a mouthful. "You could sell these, you know." Helen chuckled. "I've sold enough of myself already. These stay in the family." They ate slowly, a rhythm all their own. Chicken and cornbread leftovers, then cookies still warm, followed by tea sweet enough to make up for every bitter thing Helen had ever swallowed in silence. There were no cameras, no news headlines, No phones buzzing with messages from lawyers or family members trying to claw back relevance. Just the low hum of the refrigerator, the clink of silverware, and the sound of two women breathing in the same peace. Afterward, Giselle helped clear the dishes, rinsing them carefully, humming now herself, a tune that sounded a lot like her grandmother's. "Do you miss them?" she asked softly, not looking up from the sink. Helen took her time answering. "I miss the idea of them," she said. "But ideas fade. Truth stays." Giselle nodded, drying her hands. "Dad sent me another message last night. I didn't answer." "That's your choice," Helen said gently. "Every silence is an answer." They shared a quiet smile. When Giselle gathered her things to leave for the week, she paused at the door. "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "I think about what you said once, about not needing to win, just needing to remember. I get that now." Helen brushed a curl from the girl's forehead. "Good. Remembering is how we stay honest." Giselle hugged her tightly, that full-bodied kind of hug that feels like a promise. "See you Friday," she said, and was gone, the door clicking softly shut behind her. Helen tidied the table, wiped down the counter, and walked to her bedroom. The late afternoon light stretched long across the carpet as she knelt beside the cedar chest and opened the floor safe one last time. The air inside smelled faintly of metal and paper, a clean, quiet kind of permanence. She pulled out the familiar stack, the property title, the finalized trust, her will, all neatly bound and notarized. Everything she owned now rested exactly where she intended it to be. At the very top sat her notebook, the same worn leather that had traveled through every phase of her battle. She opened it to the first page, the one she'd written long before the lawyers, before the speeches, before the storm had cleared. In her tidy cursive, it read, "You never owed me. I gave freely, but I remember." Helen touched the ink lightly, tracing the words as if to seal them again. Then she closed the notebook and returned it to the safe, laying it flat on top of the documents that bore her name, proof of what she'd built and what she'd kept. She turned the dial until it clicked shut. Standing, she caught her reflection in the mirror across the room, the silver in her hair glinting softly, her eyes steady and bright. She thought of that brunch table months ago, the mimosa glasses, the white tablecloth, the way her son's question had sliced through the air like glass. She smiled to herself, slow, knowing, and utterly at peace. "On Mother's Day," she whispered, "my millionaire son asked, 'Do you like the $7,000 Clara gives you?'" Helen turned toward the window where the city glowed in the amber wash of sunset. Her voice was calm, triumphant, final. "And now," she said, "they'd pay 10 times that just to get back in." She reached to draw the curtain closed, her silhouette framed in gold. The light lingered a moment longer, spilling across her face before slipping away, leaving Helen Price standing in the home she owned, in the life she'd rewritten, with peace that no one could take back.